Quin Hillyer. I'm a national award-winning journalist, and I've been writing about something called the Alabama Trust Fund for 12 years now. Let me explain what this is, why the Alabama Trust Fund is important, and what's about to happen to it. On September 18th, coming right up, there's going to be a constitutional amendment on the ballot. Most Alabamians don't even know this is a special election to have a constitutional amendment to raid the Alabama Trust Fund and use it for one-time purposes. Let me explain what this is all about. You see, in 1985, Alabama realized that they had offshore energy leases that they controlled that wouldn't last forever, that were providing royalties and other revenues for the state government, but they didn't want to rely on them because eventually they will run out. So they set up something called the Alabama Trust Fund, the ATF. And what would happen is they take the oil money, and every year it would go into the trust fund. And as the years went on, the trust fund would grow bigger and bigger. And meanwhile, the interest on the trust fund, the earnings on it, would go to the general fund, or later the general fund plus various state piggy banks. I won't even get into what they are. They're just different little funds, most of which are good ideas. General fund, various piggy banks, just the interest. And meanwhile, this would keep growing over time. Now, why is this important? States, Alabama's not the only one. States tend to set up trust funds for a couple of reasons. They use them like colleges use endowment funds. You grow a big pot of money. You use the interest to help with current expenses. But meanwhile, as you grow this, it guards against A, dire emergency, and B, against a bad bond rating. What it means is if you've got a pot of money on the side, then the bond agencies look at your state government and say, we can trust them. They give you a higher bond rating. It means when you borrow money, as states do every year, for long-term capital projects, roads and bridges and stuff like that, which get paid out over time, you pay a lower interest rate if you have a higher bond rating, which means the taxpayers save money. It's a very good idea, and it's a fail-safe also in case, again, there is dire emergency. So this is very important. Protecting this is very important. Problem is, starting in 2000, state leaders started seeing that pot of money and wanting to get their hands on it. See, this was created by a vote of the people in 1985. The words used were permanent and irrevocable trust, meaning you cannot revoke it. It is there for perpetuity, and it's supposed to be sacrosanct. But in 2000, former Governor Don Siegelman came in, and he said, aha, instead of 100% of all the new revenue, we would make this 65%. And the other 35 would go straight to the various piggy banks instead of going into the Alabama Trust Fund. Not only that, but he did something else very clever. It's sort of an accounting trick. It's called the unrealized capital gains. Unrealized capital gains. And it basically means you also distribute these monies. If the stock market grows, you distribute those monies into these various piggy banks. Problem is, as I warned at the time, if the stock market goes down after it's risen, it rises a couple of years, you've distributed the money, it goes back down, that money's no longer there. The trust fund is in the red. So not only do you have 35% that would be going in to the trust fund now going over here, but you also have lost these unrealized capital gains. Here are three numbers for you. If you had kept 100% going in year after year after year from 2000, you would have $4.1 billion. You might not be able to read that. I can't write very clearly, but that's 4.1. That's a lot of money. You would have $4.1 billion in there. If you took out the 35% but left the unrealized capital gains, you would still have $3.4 billion in there. Instead, how much is in there right now? No, excuse me, 3.2. I'm sorry, I'm doing this from memory. Instead, you have $2.4 billion. You've already lost 40% of the money that would otherwise be in there. So you're already starting with less of a protection for the taxpayer than was originally supposed to be there. Now comes Governor Bentley. Bentley says, aha, we have budget problems now. We can't balance our budget. We can't possibly do it this year. So we're going to do a sort of a one-time deal. For the first time ever, we're going to actually carve out part of the trust fund that's already existing, part of this $2.4 billion, and go $145.7 million a year into the general fund for 3 years. Here, and then here, and then here again. So you're cutting out $437 million from this sacrosanct trust fund. That's what he wants to do. But it gets even sneakier, and nobody has reported this. In addition to taking money from the principal of the fund, this plan also gets rid of this 65% and makes it 33%. So another 32% goes into the general fund and various piggy banks. So now you have 67% of all new oil revenues not going into the ATF in the first place. It's going to cost the ATF another $60 million a year, in addition to the $437 million over 3 years that's taken right from the principal. And there's nothing in here, not a thing, that says that this money will ever be paid back. Now, you say, okay, well, so we only have $2 billion instead of $2.4 billion. In the long run, what does it matter? Well, remember what I said about bond ratings. Moody's Investment Service last year analyzed all the state budgets and all the states, for every state, the unfunded future liabilities that state governments had built up. Alabama's, look at this number. This board is getting too complicated, I'm sorry. But can you see that? Does that look good? 195% of the state's budget is, 195% of the size of the state's budget is unfunded liabilities. That's money that in the future, based on current revenues, based on the expansion of revenues that's expected, nearly twice as much revenue, as the revenues that will come in, is going to be owed to outside third parties. That's horrible. Where does it rank? Ranks Alabama worse than more than 3 out of every 4 states in the union. This means fiscal disaster coming up, and it means that unless, and I repeat, unless we do things like shore up the Alabama Trust Fund, the investor services are going to eventually, sooner rather than later, look and say, Alabama has not a big enough fail-safe. They have unfunded liabilities too big. We're going to downgrade their bond rating. It's going to cost more for roads and bridges. Taxpayers are going to be more on the hook. That's what they're trying to do, all to serve one short-term need, saying, oh, we don't have enough money in the current budget. Now, hope you got all that, because I'm going to erase it, because here's the deal. They're trying to fill, for each of 3 years, a hole, red ink, of 100, come on, board, 100, and 30, what was it, $135.7 million for each of 3 years. Well, they say they can't fill that hole. Here's the dirty little secret. There have already been several official commissions, one by the state Senate leader, one by the governor, that has been set up to identify possible savings. This is readily achievable money that can be saved from the current budget. By my math, I added it all up. They've identified not 135, but $231 million a year that they've already identified could be saved. I'll just give you 2 examples. Right now you have 11,000 state workers that are at the high end of the pay scale because they've been there so long, that are nearing retirement age. If you just take 1,500 of them, about 8%, and offer them early retirement, you save $82 million a year. Now, they've done the math for this next thing. They've shown it absolutely. All the state has to do is go from paper checks for every state worker to electronic funds transfer. Most of you out there already get your money, get your salary every week, get your paycheck direct deposited to the bank without paper. You know how much that would save the state every year? $48 million. You're already up to $130 million of the 135 with just those 2 moves. And they've identified another $101 million on top of that. This is doable. This is savable without touching the sacred Alabama Trust Fund. Why would they want to touch the Alabama Trust Fund if they can do this? Well, they hadn't quite gotten all this data back yet when they did this in the legislative session in the spring. And they had some people that benefit from the general fund and the various piggy banks that wanted more money. And they saw a way to get their hands on it. State voters should say no. On September 18th, coming right up, you get a chance to vote yes or no on this raid on the Alabama Trust Fund. You don't need to raise it because the savings are achievable elsewhere. So it's not needed in the short term. And as I showed before, it's terrible in the long term. It's going to cost every one of us money and cost us our nest egg. Alabamians, you don't need to put up with this. You can go vote no on September 18th, and you will save the state's nest egg and make the politicians actually do the job of saving money that is easy to save. Thank you very much. I'm Quin Hillyer reporting from Mobile.